some of this is usable. Okay, team, welcome to the September Business Book Club. We are fresh off of Labor Day, and I feel like there's been more excitement around this book maybe than, I don't know, maybe since like Chris Voss last year. Like, people were really excited for this book. I am joined by Gabrielle G.B. Blackwell and Amy Rahovchik. Nailed that last name. Before we jump into introductions, a few little housekeeping bits, and I'm going to share my screen here. We have some pretty exciting stuff coming up. I am adding a new series to Business Book Club. I'm going to just put you all on the spot to get some feedback while we're here. So I'm going to do a new series called Business Book Club in Practice, because the whole concept of book club from the jump was like a bit of accountability, a bit based on the concept that we just consume, but rarely take the time to like digest and talk through and take action on. So I have two scheduled already: Atomic Habits on the 12th with Luigi Prestonenzi, who's amazing. And then also amazing, More Aseline is going to join me on October 10th for Challenger Customer Disco questions. And he's like the king of discovery questions. What do we love this?
Yes.
Okay.
It's awesome. I love Challenger Customer too. I think I bought that book, like 2 copies of that book one time, just because I was so excited and forgot that I had read it already. And now I think I display both of them. So I got to join this one. It's amazing. Amazing. They both are. Great
One of my very unpopular opinions is that Challenger Customer is like 100 times better than Challenger Sale.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that 100%.
Okay.
Leslie, I love that book. And by the way, Angela Duckworth is amazing.
I'm so excited.
I'm so
we switched out. I'm trying to even think what the December book was, but we switched. Oh, it was a leadership book by Lori Daskell, and we switched that one out for Grit, based on Jeremy Markey, who's a member, like was like maybe member number 1, sign up number 1, based on his recommendation. So that book is December, November, Seth Godin's new book, The Song of Significance, which is about like finding purpose in this current crazy work like environment that we're all living in. And then next month is Predictably Irrational. And Josh Roth told me that's his favorite book he's ever read.
Wow.
And I said, great, well, you will be joining me as my guest then. So very excited about all of that. And then, of course, I think most everybody's a member, but just in case you aren't and you want to join, you can always learn more. Seriously, no pressure. But if you want to learn more, want to think about joining, just check out the deets on Patreon. Okay, let's jump in with some intros. I am really excited about both of our guests today. Amy, you and I have had the privilege to collab many times, but GB, I don't know how it's happened, but you and I have like never had a proper just like collab.
No, I think we like jumped into Zoom. This was years ago. First time, I think I don't think I like was following you on LinkedIn. We were just in a room. It's like, oh, here's Leslie. And the next thing I know, I was like, oh, she does a bunch of TikToks. Cool.
It was Pavilion. It was for Pavilion. I joined one of the calls, and afterwards I was like, nobody, this is offensive, but I was like, nobody else on that call sounded like a super genius, but this woman like blew my damn mind, like immediately sent you a message. It was like, so tell me more about what's going on in your life. Yes, so I stopped you after meeting you on Pavilion.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's dive in. Jimmy, maybe you go first, and then Amy, tell us a bit about yourselves. And then I'm also keen, if you wouldn't mind, because I sent you like 12 book choices, and both of you immediately, like all capital letters, were like, this is the one. Why were you so excited about this particular book?
All right, cool. So hey everyone, I'm Gabrielle, or GB. I lead a sales development team at Culture Amp. I've worked at places like Gong, Airtable. Now Culture Amp. I have a newsletter that I send out every Thursday for frontline sales managers as well. It's called the One-on-One. And I was telling Leslie and Amy this prior to everybody joining. I'm in my soft girl era right now where I just love up on me, and I decide not to go to conferences so that I can snuggle with my dog. So that's me in a nutshell right now. And Radical Candor, I feel like completely transformed how I approach leading people, and how I give feedback, and like just my own attitude towards like how feedback is delivered, and recognizing like what is it that other people need, and not necessarily about what makes me comfortable. And when I started to make those changes, I started to see that I had like not just like a higher performing team, but I started to see that I had better relationships with every single person on my team. And it just made me feel a lot more comfortable. Like I think when I think about the kind of managers I've had, I've like, even my best boss I'd ever had wasn't really coaching me or giving me feedback, like, because I was figuring out a lot of things by myself. But like the worst manager I've ever had just treated me like absolute shit. So I like didn't really know the middle ground. So it was just I think it was just a very, very, very helpful and like practical book that all managers and aspiring managers should read. So yeah.
Everybody, I would argue. And feel free to drop the link to your newsletter in the chat so that if anybody wants to join, they can. And I hear you. Like my first sentiment when I was just like only 15 pages into the book was, oh my God, this is so validating. Yeah. Amy, how about you?
I like starting with, I'm a revenue human for life. I sold enterprise tech for a decade. I built out 2 sales enablement departments, oversaw or managed a team that took a startup to a successful acquisition. Now I have a boot camp where I teach sellers how to act like human beings and also create winning buying experiences. I have a podcast about uncomfortable conversations, which I think is, I think the answer to, well, part A of the answer to why I wanted to talk about this book. I think I love leaning into hard conversations. It's something that served me very well while selling, and even more so while leading. And it's such, to Gabrielle's point, it's such a big skill gap in sales in particular. I think the way that just the lack of training, the lack of coaching around frontline managers has really created this systemic issue across the board. And I know, Mike Simmons, I cannot wait to read your new book. I know you know this better than anyone on this call right now. It's a massive issue. But anyway, and so anything that I can do to both share what I've learned, what I took from the book, what I've seen in practice on the receiving end of that, and just to generate more awareness around the subject, that there is a way forward. And there's a great book that really lays out the framework, pretty beautifully. And so that's why I'm here.
Amazing. I was about ready to get on Mike to be like, I'm sorry, book, and you just didn't mention it. I think you're manifesting for him.
You are. So there'll be a book at some point. I've got 2 outlines. I just need to get one book done. So
okay. Speaking of books, this is a total aside. Next week, probably, if not the week after, I'm going through very final edits for The Shit People Say, inspired by that viral TikTok series of the cringeworthy LinkedIn
Oh my
post.
gosh, yeah.
So that book will be out soon. It'll be out just in time to buy it as like a passive aggressive gift for a colleague as we head into the holidays.
Leslie, speaking of manifesting, I feel like we need to publicly acknowledge, what was it, Forbes or Wall Street Journal that you were pulled into to quote on? That is such a massive accomplishment. I saw that and I celebrated in such a big way. Like, baller. Thank you for repping for all of us. Like, fucking awesome. No offense for the F-bomb, but
Amy?
What'd you say?
I didn't get included in that one. And the person that reached out to me sent me like the nicest note back. And I was like, oh, that's okay. That's why we don't wait to celebrate the big things. We celebrate the small things along the way, and just like really chose to take it as a win and a positive. I kid you not, another independent of that person reached out to me yesterday, and I have an interview scheduled with her tomorrow. And guess what it's about, team? She saw my post about showing up, being radically candid, inspired by having read this book, and reached out and wanted to interview me about my experiences.
That's amazing.
How freaking cool is that?
That's amazing. And you've earned every opportunity that comes out your way. Like, thank you. It's
Oh
awesome.
my gosh, thank you. Thank you. Okay, well, let's jump into this book because it is so good. It's so meaty. It's all the things. And I want to jump into some of the, like, one of the meatier parts, the core of the book, I'd say, which is the quadrant.
Mhm.
And obviously the premise is that our goal should be to spend most of our time in the radical candor or compassionate candor quadrant, but we often find ourselves veering towards one of the other quadrants. And I'm gonna ask you, GB and Amy, to call yourselves out in a second here. But for everybody else, like, if you feel comfortable, drop your response in the comments, because I'd love to see kind of where people are at in the group. But the other quadrants, as a reminder, were ruinous empathy. You care way too much, but without doing any of the productive challenging. Below that was manipulative insincerity. You care about centering your well-being first and foremost. And then the final quadrant was obnoxious aggression. You challenge directly, but you haven't shown that you care deeply. Like, you haven't earned the trust of others to make some of those aggressive statements.
Mhm.
I will share mine straight away, but again, would love to see people drop theirs in the chat. I definitely default to obnoxious aggression. Like, that's where I go when I'm on high alert. And I, like, one of the parts I felt so validated by in this book is that Kim gives us permission with being okay, even if we're not the perfect embodiment of radical or compassionate candor, and shares a lot of stories of when she has missed and like how she comes back to like acknowledging that she maybe fell into obnoxious aggression or ruinous empathy or manipulative insincerity. So I'd love to hear from each of you, like, what is your default when you're not ideal, and how do you acknowledge that and then like come correct?
I'm laughing. So I'm also obnoxious aggression. And I think before I read this book, the way that I qualified my past self was like a recovering asshole. And it doesn't help that I'm from Jersey, right? And so one of my favorite things to teach is like how you show up in different geographic regions matters, right? And the nuance to like Seattle versus in New Jersey or New York City. But it took a while to learn that. And so, yeah, I think step one is awareness, and then, but I'll pause and hand it over to GB. What say you, girlfriend?
Yeah, okay. Maybe this is an asshole thing to say, but like my default now is radically candid. Like I've just I've taken my beats and my lickings like a lot. Of previously, like my former default was ruinous empathy. I'd say, yeah, that was like 3 years ago. And then, had an experience where a rep like tore my ass up for 45 minutes. Like, we had a 45-minute one-on-one scheduled, starts off the call, shares that they are going to be resigning from the company, and then proceeds to tell me for the next 41 minutes how I was absolutely terrible as a manager, that I didn't give them feedback, that I wasn't correcting them, I wasn't giving them what they needed. They're like, I was obviously not doing things right and you never said anything. And even if I perceived that I was, like, that did not register for the person. And so I was like, okay, like, I'm over here really worried about, like, am I going to do or say something that's really going to set somebody off? And I hadn't yet figured out how to help myself, like, really get on board with being radically candid. So I have some like exercises or things that I, from my own study, from reading the book, from chatting with mentors and advisors and things like that, like things that have helped me to what I call like get consent to be radically candid with people. But I think given that now, right? Yeah. So for me, it very much is like orienting my entire way that I approach my people in a very radically candid way. Like, it's like a
That's
discipline
wild.
now.
Yeah.
That would be humbling.
It was something.
Yeah, I would have.
I mean, I appreciate it. Was, you know, it's funny because it's like, I just remember this person, they go, okay, well, I've got some encouragement for you. And I was like, this is not encouraging at all. Like, I was like, I think we got different definitions of, I didn't say that out loud, but I just sat there and I just listened. I just listened to like, and the person was really, they were very open. So there's certain things where I had to like take it with a grain of salt, but there was a lot that was really valid.
Kudos to you for not, you know what I mean? For like, but just listening, for like taking it in instead of kicking them out or not taking it seriously, because obviously it was one of those defining moments in your career. And interestingly, it sounds like that rep that was giving you feedback was like playing in the Radical Candor quadrant a little bit. Like maybe they were dipping into the obnoxious aggression if they were going a little bit too hard, but at personal risk to themselves, they took the time to give you that really raw and honest feedback and clearly tried to frame it. And
yeah, I mean, there was no risk. They were resigning. So like I don't think there was any risk to it. It was definitely like it was a conversation. It was a conversation that had a lot of takeaways from it. So definitely made me realize like, all right, in my quest to be a certain kind of manager, like I was failing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, GP, if I have to say, as someone that's watching you from the outside and reading your newsletter and watching your posts and your TikToks, it's inspiring to see that you do lead and manage from this place of radical candor. And it's on the off chance you haven't heard it yet today. Thank you. Like it's fucking awesome. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I see a couple comments here that I want to call out. Heidi made the point of saying, asking for permission to be radically candid. And Ellie dropped the comment that I actually started using years ago. I read this book for the first time now, and I was like, oh man, I'm really using a lot of this. Thanks, Kim Scott. And that was one of the hardest pivots for me, because I think for years I was like, I am your manager. I get to give you feedback and you listen. Like that's how this works. As like a true display of obnoxious aggression and like rooting myself and my ego. And I made the pivot to asking people if they were ready or open to hear feedback maybe like 7 or 8 years ago. Game changer. But it's like still sometimes, I don't want to say difficult, but it still sometimes is not my default, where I just want to like jump right in. And I'm like, dial it back, Vanessa. It's like, you do not know that person this well. I see it a lot when I am coaching folks for rework training, because I do not know them at all, but I get so excited because there's so many things and I'm like, oh, this was great. And you can do this. And I have to be like, whoa. Give them a second to take a breath and then ask them if they're ready for some feedback. And then sometimes they're like, no, I'm not. Can we just role play more? And I'm like, that's fine. Like, you don't have to. Like, if role playing is what you want to get out of this, you don't have to take the feedback if you're not ready to it. But that was a tough one for me.
Yeah, I feel like the rework one, it might be a little bit different, because it's not necessarily like a individual contributor or employee manager dynamic like that. It's a kind of a call, like almost like a consultation call on that point. But I think one thing that I want to definitely click into in terms of the asking for permission, like, so this is why I say, like, when I think about like radical candor as like a discipline, it's not just all right, hey, we're getting into a conversation and I'm like, hey, Amy, is it cool? Like, are you in a space to receive some feedback right now? It starts from the very beginning. Like, if you're like, you're a leader, people manager, whatever, you've got somebody who's coming on board to your team. Like, step one, there's like a process of establishing that trust, right? Because like the way to mitigate from becoming like obnoxiously aggressive is you've built that trust first. Right? Like, you've earned their trust. And so like, I think there's also this piece around like, and also me as an individual within a corporate setting, I do not do well with people just telling me what to do, like, do this because blah blah blah. And I'm like, first of all, go to fucking therapy. Second of all,
Yeah.
whatever parent-child weird shit that you got going on in your life, that's your problem, not mine. Don't make it my problem. So like that's, I'm just, is all to say, like, that's just me as an individual. I'm very rebellious to like authority that's supposed to be like thrown down my throat. So, so I like kind of would try and go on the totally opposite side of that. But to earn the trust, I think there is one part of like, you have to show people that you are invested personally in them. So there's an exercise that I do with reps who join, and it's a 7-minute exercise. So like set up a call, like we have our first call, we're just getting to know each other. And then I tell them like, hey, part of what's going to make this a really successful partnership between yourself and myself, it's a partnership, is that you feel like you can trust me, right? And I can feel like I can trust you. And this means that I need to understand how I need to show up for you individually as a manager to earn and continue to build that trust, right? So like the better we're able to do that, the better off you'll be able to perform, and the better of a manager I will be. So like the first conversation that we're going to have after today is we'll do a 7-minute exercise. One of us talks about our lives for 7 minutes, unstructured, no interruptions. Then the other person goes, and that usually gives us an opportunity to just like learn a little bit more about what's like really top of mind for you. Maybe there's some family dynamics that are going to influence how you show up into work. Maybe there are some like really amazing things and that have happened, and I'm trying to emulate the people who did those amazing things. There might be some really shitty things that happened, and I want to understand what to avoid with you, right? So it's really starting to get a feel for like, what are this person's triggers? What inspires them, what makes them glow. So that's the first conversation. The second conversation that we'll have then is more about like creating a playbook for me as a manager of how I work with you. So we'll go through like, hey, like who do you want to be, right? As a professional, as a sales professional in a performance-based role. So like, do you want to be somebody who's 100%? Do you want to be 120? Do you want to be 130? Do you want to be a high flyer 150? Like, where do you like, what kind of performer do you see yourself as, or do you envision yourself as? Right. So like, why is that important? What does that give you? Like, so there's that piece first. And then it's more about, okay, now, how do you want me to show up when fill in the blank, right? How do you want me to show up for you when you are at your goal? Like you're pacing at your goal. How do you want me to show up? When you are pacing behind, how do you want me to show up? When you are way ahead of it, how do you want me to show up? And people will give you a blueprint of exactly what you need to do to figure out what it means to be radically candid with them specifically. Because like, if I go up to Marin and I'm like, hey, Marin, you did like, Marin might be like, hey, listen, give me the shit, like talk to me crazy. And that's what, and I'm like, okay, right. But if I go to Mike and I talk to him, like I talk to Marin, and I'm like, oh, but I'm being radically candid. To Mike, I'm coming off as obnoxiously aggressive. So this is where I think like so when I say like I call it gaining consent to fill in the blank, right? Because I'm like, I always want to make sure that I'm showing that I care while balancing standards, right? But I need to make sure that I have the blueprint for that. I need to tailor it to the rep.
Yeah, this made me think of two things. One of the most quoted pieces of the book is, it doesn't matter how it comes out of your mouth, it matters how it goes into their ears, which is exactly what it's like silver rule, right? It's not do unto others as you want them to do on to you, it's do unto others as they want to be done on to them. And like, I think Mike a bit earlier in the chat even dropped a comment that he thinks he's radically candid, but sometimes he comes off as obnoxious aggression. And I think as I was finding my way as a new manager, I experienced some of that as well, that I was figuring it out with some of my team and trying to drag and drop that to new members. I mean, I also had like a ridiculous head count for a while, which may have held me back a little bit. But I think that's an important point you made, that you really have to figure out how to meet every single team member where they are at, to figure out when and how they like to receive feedback. And another piece you said, which is a question that I had queued up, so it's a perfect little segue here, is about showing up authentically when it doesn't always feel safe to. And yeah, right. And I think the way that you explain that exercise, 7 minutes of talking, and it's an opportunity for them to share, but they don't have to share anything they're not comfortable sharing,
Mhm.
So one of the things that Kim said is that one of the reasons we struggle to care personally, like get to that higher level of care personally, is because we are afraid to do exercises like the one that you just outlined, because we get really confusing messages about, oh, we need to show up as our whole selves, but also keep it professional. And then often we are punished if we stop masking. And one of the quotes I pulled out of the book that was like sort of in the chapter where Kim's going deep on that topic is that disconnect makes people hate to go to work. And the result is that nobody feels comfortable being who they are. So I like how, and I think GB, you really painted a nice picture of how you can start creating that relationship. So Amy, maybe your take, like how do you show up authentically or encourage others to show up authentically at work while still maintaining a professional work environment? And like, what even does that mean anymore?
Yeah. I think there are a couple of things that come to mind. One, for me, in the group settings, right? I create spaces where we've got some light, not rules per se, but like guidelines, right? Where be kind to each other, judgment-free zone. And so overall, like there's a general understanding of what this space represents and how to show up. And people are, and mistake friendly zone. Okay. So people are less afraid to make mistakes. So that's a big piece of it, right? I don't just use the individual one-on-ones as a time to lead by example or create a space where people can feel a certain way. Number one. Number two, people learn in binaries, right? And so whenever I talk about feedback, on both sides of it, giving and receiving, I talk about what the opposite of feedback is, or a universe without feedback. And that is simply a harboring of blind spots that you didn't know about, that I didn't know about. And so by painting the opposite, right, of what not saying something looks like, it tends to take the sting, the momentary sting off of the feedback when it's given. Or received, right? I'll be repeating that to myself as well. And so those are just two things that come like right to mind. And then the third one, and I will say, is going first, right? The same thing with selling, right? You want to create trust. You want to create a space where someone feels comfortable or safe enough to share. Then I'm going to go first. I'm going to lean into vulnerability first, and that energy is often matched. And so those are the three things that I would say.
I love that. Anybody else want to jump in with insight? I feel like that's a difficult question, right? Like, how do you show up authentically? How do you bring yourself, your whole self, to your job and encourage, if you're a manager, or even if you're not a manager, encourage others to do the same, without maybe crossing a line and caring too deeply where you make somebody uncomfortable, or without maybe dropping your mask if you don't feel totally safe doing that quite yet in your environment. Like, it's a very, I think, nuanced path to go down. Any other thoughts? Everybody looks like they're in deep thought right now. GB, what were you gonna?
I do have thoughts, but I wanted to.
Oh yeah,
A lot. So Heidi, go ahead.
No, I love what all of you said, and I think the foundation though does have to be based in trust. That you have to earn the right before you can have that level of radical candor and be able to provide that feedback. Because at least for me, and I don't know if this resonates with others, but as a leader, if I start giving feedback without earning that trust and gaining that respect almost from the individual that I'm providing that feedback to, then either I just get, a wall comes up and they shut down, or it gets met with resistance, right? So I found that I love the idea of getting permission and asking, whether an individual is open to that kind of feedback.
Mhm.
And what you know, and also this concept of, if you don't receive the feedback, that you're harboring blind spots. I
Mhm.
just absolutely love that concept, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
not everybody is ready to receive that feedback and to kind of face their blind spots head on.
Mhm.
So I don't know. That's my thought. And the other thing about this radical candor for me is that we can't use it to just be overly abusive or overly aggressive, right? Like, I still think that there's needs to be a level of sensitivity in terms of how the feedback is delivered. So for me, that's a delicate balance as I think about how I provide feedback. Because you know, I'm all about being really open and honest, but not everybody is ready for that. So um I don't know, we can't use it as an excuse to be overly aggressive.
No,
That's
I
my
think yeah, that's a great point. And I think it echoes some of what GB and Amy were sharing as well, that it's not about centering your communication preferences or the way you like to give feedback.
right.
It is caring deeply enough to first uncover
Mhm.
the preferences of your, peers or team members, and then take action against those, so that we stay in that compassionate, that radical candor quadrant, versus starting to center ourselves in the conversation and dipping back down into obnoxious aggression. Yeah,
Yeah, I
great
love that.
insights. Thanks, Heidi.
I feel like we've gone on a few different threads. So there's like the authenticity piece, there's the feedback piece as well. And like, granted, I haven't read Radical Candor in a couple of years, but like studied it deeply. It's not, I mean, it's not just about giving feedback. Like I think that's like one big thing about the book. Like there's everything from understanding what kind of performer you have. And if this is a professional who is high potential but low performance, how do you approach them in that way versus somebody who's low potential, low performance? But I think there's also something here about like, just know, like this, I think the second most effective style is the obnoxious aggression, right? Like there's a line in there that it will live rent free in my brain for the rest of my life and the future lives that I will have, which is people would rather work for an asshole who helps them get better at their job than somebody who's nice and doesn't help them get better at their job, right? Like, so I think when we're thinking about like trust as well, like there's the trust of like, hey, I want to get to know you as a person, and like I want to care about you personally, and I want to invest in you personally. Like that is my, like, nothing gives me a greater sense of meaning and significance in what I'm doing than to see somebody move into the position that's like the best for them, even if that means getting off my team. Granted, I'm managing SDR, so it's very much par for the course on that side of things. So like, but I also have to be in a position to like, part of what makes me a really great manager is like, I know this role like the back of my hand. And it's not that that matters all that much to my people, but I'm like, I always tell my folks like, hey, I know this shit like the back of my hand. Like, if you don't do this, I'll be fine, right? But what I'm even better at is getting you to a point where you're better than me. So when somebody is like not receptive to the feedback, if I've done my own check, like there's always, I need to go check myself, like, am I off on this? Am I wrong with this? Like, so I will just have that conversation and go, hey, listen, it seems like there's some kind of blocker, right? Like there's something that's getting in the way of achieving this. It seems like you're going this way. I believe this side could be helpful, but like, what am I missing here? Right? Like, 'cause I'm like, I could always be wrong. And I think that's part of that authenticity piece. It's like people are paying attention to how you show up. So when I think about what it means to be authentic in a workspace, it doesn't mean like, oh, I'm going around and I'm sharing every single one of my feelings. It means for me, like, I have no problem saying I don't know.
I
It
made a
means
mistake.
that,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
I made a mistake. I need help, right? I'm
Mhm.
struggling. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm
Mhm.
having a challenge. I'm having a rough day. I need a beat. No, I'm not in a place to have feedback. Like it's
Yeah.
more about, right? Like,
Yes.
yes, I want your feedback, right? Like, hey, I hear you, but I don't agree. right? Like it feels like that's really the authenticity or piece of things, which is you're creating a culture where people can say that. So it's more about how do you show up? So like if a rep asks you a question and then you don't know the answer, are you about to bullshit them? Or are you about to say, hey, Leslie, I don't know, but let me go find out, right? Or even, hey, Leslie, I don't know, but who do you think, like, who in your circle of friends or coworkers do you know who might be able to help, right? Or, hey, I was just talking to John. John was masterful at this. I think you should go talk to John. Come back, let me know how you feel about that, right? So, or if I'm talking to Ellie and Ellie's like, oh, hey, GB, I'm going to go do this X, Y, and Z. Ellie's behind on her numbers. You would never be in your life. I know Ellie, but in this example, right. But Ellie's behind and Ellie's like, hey, I'm just going to keep on doing what I'm doing. I'm going to go, hey, Ellie, I'm going to be honest with you. I trust that you can get to your number. What I don't trust is your process of how you get there. Right. Like I trust you, not your process. And so I want to make sure I would feel wholly irresponsible if I let you keep doing what's obviously not working. Right. I don't want to be irresponsible. So can we just explore a different way? Like my way might not be the best, but I think like our two brains together, we can come up with something really cool.
I love how you also just pre-separated how if I received that feedback and you just told me that my process sucked, I would take it personally. You're like, dude, I got you. You're good. Your process is stinky. Like, let's figure it out together.
Yeah.
It's not my fault that my process sucks. You took that pressure like right out of my brain. Just the way that you even said that. It was really great.
Ellie, I'm gonna
Thank you
add
for
on
the feedback.
Ellie, I'm gonna add on something. GB, you said something on my show too that like adds like an extra layer of color to what you just shared, and that is like I asked you, I pushed actually for like which metric are you most like what is it like on the SDR front? Like tell me if you had to say, and you were like, listen, I don't care. The most important metric is number of meetings set. On my team, like I don't necessarily care how you get there. And so it's like, it also strips away all that's not important from the conversation, and it gives space to have that my process versus your process or the process you're using. And it just, I remember thinking it was artful in the moment. And so like pairing it with this next level. Spot on.
I mean, there's like baseline because I'm like, hey, listen, if you can hit your number without doing the minimum activities, like you're not going to hear from, like the only thing you'll hear from me is how do you do it, right? Like the only thing like the only thing I'm gonna really challenge you to do is to document and operationalize your success, right? So that way, like if let's just say that you're no longer reporting to me and now you're working for someone who's a total metrics asshole, right? You're going to need to be able to defend your work, right? So now we're teaching defense. so that's what we're going to do here. But like, you know, if someone's like, oh, hey, I'm doing the minimum activities, I'm not hitting my numbers, I'm like, what else are you going to do if that's not working? We're seeing that it's not working. Like we always have accountability measures, right? So hey, like how do we know that your plan is going to work? Like what? Okay, we're going to strategy review, and then when should we check? Next week. Okay, what are the measures? Wonderful. How are you going to know that it's not working? Not me. See, I always tell people, I'm like, listen, I'll be fine. I'm fucking Gabrielle Blackwell. I'll be fine. How are you going to know before our next one-on-one, so you can make better decisions for yourself? How are you going to know whether or not this is working for you or not? Right. It's like, it really is more so like, I think like, it's like the challenging is more like, hey, I can be the one to harass you all day, or you can get way better at self-managing yourself. And then I kind of come in just to more so like check, like, and refine more than anything else.
You're also teaching them strategic skill sets, so that they're not just day-to-day operators. They have the ability to think through an entire process. They have the ability to create an SOP or a playbook, even if it's just the one thing that they are doing. Like you are taking them from the level of like specific incident up to strategically thinking about how they are approaching things. And that is, they might not realize it in the moment, but I mean, that's a serious skill set to have the freedom to flex, particularly an SDR role. Like that is not the norm.
Yeah. But
So,
yeah,
It's
yeah.
putting back on them too, that they have the power. Like you have the
Yeah,
power to change
ownership.
your own destiny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm good. I'm happy. I'm here to support you and be a resource for you and be a sounding board for you. But this is about you going to do your
Yeah.
job, and how are you going to know that you're doing your job well?
Yeah.
I love
And
the way that you
also-
position that. You've got this like really good positioning of
Studied
your
this shit because I was working for an absolute jackass, and then he wanted me to be like him, and that's how shit blew up in my face. And then fast forward, and I was like, I really need to figure out how I want to show up. So, but I did write down just a few quick notes on the authenticity part. I think that if there was like 3 or 4 things that I would recommend, I think it's like thinking about if you want your people to be authentic, like you need to model that, right? So like the teaching comes from the modeling. And so like what I said before, it's the I don't know, right? Or hey, I hear you, but I don't agree, right? So like giving people permission and giving people the space. Like even if I'm giving them feedback, I'll ask the question, how is that landing with you right now? Right? Like
Mm,
how are you feeling about this? And if people don't, if they say, hey, listen, I hear you, GB, but I don't know. Okay, let's talk about that. Because maybe I'm wrong. And I'll say that to people. I'm like, hey, listen, I'm gonna give you feedback based off of what I know, but here's what I need from you, right? To figure out if this is sound or not. So okay, so I talked about like, modeling it, but so modeling authenticity, cultivating, and giving even people feedback like, hey, it seems I noticed that we talked about this feedback, you haven't implemented it, but you're having other success. Like, what's going on here? By the way, just let me know if it's not going to work. If you don't believe it, just let me know beforehand, and that way we can adjust sooner. And I think there's something that's really important about like just having clear expectations with people as well, like as to like what authenticity is and what it is not. And so if people know from the very beginning, like, oh, like my manager, my boss, whatever, they want to hear from me about things that I don't agree with, and I'm recognized for that as well, then that really shows to people like, oh, it's safe, it's okay.
I like that distinction. I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction, but I feel like we went deep on that piece, and it is like it's a really core tenet of the book that's important. So appreciate everybody spending a little bit of extra time on that. I want to talk about the rockstar versus superstar distinction, and that was like one of my favorite parts of the book as well. You know what's so interesting? I had a handful of people reach out to me to be like, oh, like, are you sure it's okay for me to attend this month? I'm not a manager. And I was like, oh, everybody should read this book. You should read this book to think about how you are managing up, how you are interacting with your peers, about your own career pathing, like
Your buyers.
like this book is for everybody. I thought that the rock star versus the superstar distinction was really great. It was also something very early in my career that I got wrong when I was figuring out how to manage people, and I would figure out how to manage some people because they had the same career trajectory as I did. They wanted the same, general things from their career as I did. And I was like, oh, I know how to manage that person. And then would struggle to understand why that didn't drag and drop to those rock star players. Later in my career, those became, often my favorite people to manage because they show up and do the same things consistently, and they are so dependable. And I don't have a specific question, but I just would love to hear thoughts about that, like rock star versus superstar distinction, and how you manage those employees differently, particularly the rock star piece. I think they're more difficult to manage because the way that you show them you're investing and the way you show them growth is not as easy as just keying them up for their next promotion. Amy, I know you've led enablement a couple times. How have you approached that?
I want to add one thing to the framework of this discussion, and that is that people are not static beings and that they change and they evolve. And then the words that we use to describe them, the qualifiers, removing gender, removing performance, like it, and removing the categorization as one being better than the other. It hit home for me in a big way reading it the second time. So that's the first thing. The second thing, so my last job, I was the director of integrated demand management, which was an interesting hybrid position where we were doing marketing from a demand creation, capture, conversion perspective, as well as sales enablement of the outbound social selling. And there was a team of 8 people, and I was kind of stepping into it, and we were in different organizations and the way that I approached it initially was to do exactly what GB said and spend time like getting to know these people, right? And forming that just foundation. But the next thing was I really dug into what they enjoyed doing and what they wanted to learn about. Right. And so I found that when I focused on what people want to learn about, it, I know it doesn't necessarily answer your question between top performer or like growth or rockstar. I forget the terms. But I just looked at it in a different way. And so and then I was able to back up that conversation, right? Taking a breath to really get to know people and learn what they enjoyed doing most and what they wanted to learn about. And I started to dole out, like I cut up the department and doled out responsibilities that way. And it just gave everyone the opportunity to operate in the place where they wanted to operate at that moment. And so I wouldn't say I necessarily put them into like rock star, medium performer, or, like really fast trajectory, or just more, again, carry along. Forgive me, I forget the terms. But because we focused on what people enjoyed doing and what they wanted to learn more of, we were really able to get the best performance from everybody. So again, I hope that like kind of answers the question a little bit, but is how I generally approach it. Instead of looking at how quickly they want to move, we're looking at what they enjoy doing, what they want to do more of, and what they're specifically focused on learning from a career trajectory standpoint.
Yeah, I've definitely found that people that are the rock star, meaning they don't want that upward growth trajectory, often tend to be very high input people. Like they are very eager to learn and to grow. And Ellie, I can't wait to hear what you're gonna say, because I know you've managed large teams. One quick thought to share first. One of my, I think, like early manager aha moments that was both an exercise in care deeply and was an exercise in figuring out how to manage rock stars was I started going deep on what folks were going to spend their commission on. And what was most important to them. Like, what's the number one way I can support you? What are you going to do with this money once we like help you achieve or exceed your goals? And so rarely were it like these like big audacious things. It was like, I want to send money back to my mom. I want to pay off my student loan debt. Like I want to take my kid to Disneyland. And it was these moments of being like, oh, this is what actually matters to this person, not like helping us get to our $20 million goal. It was being able to to exceed quota enough times during the year that they had enough money to take their kid to Disneyland for Christmas. And it was, at the same time, a conversation that made me realize that like a lot of people just want to show up and get their dang job done and like do it and do it well, but then just go home. Like they do not want their identity to be tied to their job in a way that I think was just the standard, maybe as recently as 15 to 20 years ago. Like that was just the expectation. And we have really gone in a dramatically different direction. I think it's wholly positive. Ellie, what were you? Yeah, tell us everything, Ellie.
Yeah, what you just said about the generational thing is, absolutely true. And things have changed immensely. I was really sad when I read the thing about the rock stars versus superstars, because it made me realize that maybe in particular in the world we operate in SaaS, that the rock stars are not appreciated, valued, rewarded. They're just not. They're not. Like, you want a high growth team, everybody wants to be like high growth. And like, I also haven't managed salespeople before. But those people that are really excellent at their job and don't want to be promoted, you're like, what's your problem?
Yeah.
You know, like, and even from a people and culture perspective, I don't think that HR necessarily values those people. Like, you're more of the mindset of like, how long can I possibly hold this person in this position for, and like juice the most out of them before they're gonna leave me and go into the next thing, right? Like, that's not my perspective as a manager, but a lot of managers would think that way. And I think it's really sad and unfortunate, and hearing about like needing to have the balance. Like, if you only ever have superstars that just want the next thing, you don't have a well-balanced team, and who is going to be there to keep the engine going. Those people that are stoking the fire and keeping the engine going are not getting the appreciation and recognition, reward, and stuff that they need at all. And even within the team, you know, GB, you were talking about the idea of asking somebody like, what makes you glow? And if somebody said like, I was happy doing my job, I'm like, dang girl, you're doing a really good job, let's keep going. You know, is that going to be enough for them? And how about the rest of the team? How does the rest of the team perceive that person that's maybe been an SDR for life, right? They're amazing at their job. Maybe they don't even want to be the manager. That's okay. I think it's unfortunate. I think we need to rethink how these people get defined, and how we support leaders and knowing how to support them better. Because I don't think we do a good job right now.
Well said,
No,
Ellie.
there's something, oh, sorry. Yeah. Everything Amy was about to say. There's something really important about this idea of like, this is my part of my soft girl era, like meditating on this idea of like enoughness, right? So like, I think there's the enoughness, but I also, I have like maybe like a sports analogy. So I grew up playing basketball and volleyball, and majority, like, all right, anytime that you're going to watch like a very largely broadcasted contest, like sports contests, let's say it's like March Madness, you've got the NCAA championships or even the NBA finals, and there's your superstars that are going to be your starting lineup. But a lot of the times what commentators are talking about is the depth of the bench. They're like, this team has a all-star bench, and that is what's going to make them a championship team, because they can pull from anybody. And having played like team sports growing up, like we learned over time that it's like, all right, like, because if one person goes down, like, you need to be able to like get that next person in, their substitutes. Like, we're really talking about more of a team goal versus focusing just on the individual or the individuality alone of this. So I think that was maybe lucky in that way, but also when I was first starting in sales, like I was a superstar kind of person. I was like, all right, like, you're giving me this goal and I'm trying to beat everybody else out by 2-3x, which pros and cons to that kind of mindset and lifestyle. And now I'm going way far away from it. I was like, I'm done. I'm exhausted. I have nothing more to prove. Yeah. So there's that. But like, what I really appreciated about the leaders that I had at that organization is it was never about like, sales rep number one stack ranking. There was no stack ranking number one, but it was never about number one versus number two. It was all about you versus your personal record. And so we had spiffs around that as well. And so depending on what your personal record was, what you could redeem higher value gifts. So like, all right, so if I subtle brags, like I think like the most number of meetings I had booked in a week was like 14. I mean, my coworker, the most they had booked was like 4, right? So VP of sales comes in and he's like, what's your personal best? And so she goes 4. He's like, all right, what do you want if you get 7? Right? And it has a value to it. So up to $100. Okay, GB, like, you've got 14. What are you going to do when you get 20? And now you've got a $400 value, right? As well. So we very much had these kind of like personal, like everybody had an opportunity to win. That was the most important. It's like everybody has an opportunity to win in their own regard. The values change based off of how they perform as well. But I think that was the first piece, but also I think there's this consideration from a manager perspective. And like, I feel this hardcore in the SDR world where prior to pandemic hitting and every layoffs and stuff like that, it really is a rotating door of talent, which is fucking exhausting.
Mhm.
I'll be very honest. So
Mhm.
like if I only have people on my team who are on my team for 6 months and then they go, I actually never really have a team. I'm just like, I'm exhausted. It's actually terrible. Like, so quality of life of a manager is god awful because
Yep.
nobody actually wants to be on that team. What I actually prefer is having, because then also like if you have a team of you got 5 superstars and one person who feels like they're never going to be enough, that also starts to create a lot of like resentment or disgruntlement or whatever you want to call it. So it really is trying to figure out like, okay, I can have 1 or 2 rock stars who are really going to be the ones to, I call them like bar raisers,
Mhm.
right? But then I also talk to people about the X factor, right? Like it's not just you in your performance of getting 100%. It's also about what is the impact that you have on the team too. Like there are so
Mhm.
many ways that you can be a superstar. You might not be a superstar from a performance standpoint, right? But you
Mhm.
can be a superstar in your ability to demo and your ability to connect the dots and your ability to identify problems. So like, I think this is where, and now we're getting more so into strength based, right? Approaches to leadership and managing
Mhm.
folks. But I think the
Mhm.
most important thing is to create a space where everybody can win.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that so much. We are at time. I knew we were not going to have enough time for this one. Maybe
Yeah.
we'll do this one as a business book club in practice, because there were so many questions
I'm
on my
sad. I'm sad we
very
didn't
like
get to
type
the
A rubbish
gender
show.
stuff.
I know we didn't even get to.
Oh, oh.
It was so good. And I think like
Mhm.
a note to wrap it up. Obviously, so much of this advice, like invest in your managers and teach them
Mhm.
how to be good managers, is good advice.
Mhm.
On the rock star versus superstar piece, it is an insane business decision to have one rock star that's carrying the primary revenue load for you. It's like having one customer that's 50% of your revenue. It's such a big risk, yet it's something like these are things we see all the time. We overinvest in our superstars and we underinvest in our rock stars. We don't teach people how to manage. We just shove them into management roles and then let them practice on our reps and fail many, many times as they go down the path of figuring out, as the stories that all of us shared, as we figure out the manager we want to be by watching other people manage others and manage us badly. Right? Oh, I think everybody should read this book. I adored this conversation. Thank you all for being here. Special thank you, Amy and GB, for sharing your insights. Just, yeah, absolute gold. And we'll see you on LinkedIn for book club and practice. We'll see you back here next month for another one of our intimate conversations that just like fills my cup every time. So thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, Leslie. Nice meeting
Yeah,
everybody.
thank you, Leslie. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you, Leslie.